All right, tonight we've got renowned futurist Nikolas Badminton with us. He's running all over the world speaking about futurism and in all kinds of different ways, like the future of work, the economy, technology, AI, microdosing, all kinds of stuff. And we're happy to have him here with us and to take a break from the mainstream media and join us on our lowly little podcast. Welcome to the show, Nikolas.
Thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on. So there's a lot to cover. I mean, we listed a few things that you talk about all over the place, talking about futurism, and we've been wanting to do a show like this for a while. So I think before we get into like futurism itself and what that is and what you do, I mean, what are some of the latest things that you're interested in before we lose time and not be able to sort of catch some of the newer things you're following?
Yeah, so I pretty much focus on the whole technology-humanity sort of intersection. So the technologies that are coming in to sort of disrupt and change how we operate. So really, I sort of follow every week what's going on in the world by consuming as much articles, information, video. I talk to people doing research. When I travel, I go to maker spaces. I go to universities. I chat to people there that are sort of breaking some of the boundaries just to find out what's going on in the world. And there's sort of 8 main areas of technology that I like to talk about. So, everything from like big data, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, renewable energy. We've got the blockchain, which is really hot, and obviously Bitcoin's built on that. Yeah. I don't love talking about that, but we can talk a little bit about that later. There's personalized medicine I'm super excited about, and we can get into a little bit. And then there's sort of the edge stuff and the super cool, really future stuff, which is like around the nanotechnology and a number of different things happening around quantum computing, quantum communications, and some really, really cool stuff that's actually happening around quantum teleportation.
Oh, wow.
Quantum. Is that like the chemical computers that I'm hearing about? Is that how you make a quantum computer, with chemicals?
Yeah, well, all computers are kind of made with chemicals and minerals and whatever, right? But like the quantum computers are built in different ways. So it's the idea that a qubit is like a bit, except it can be 1 and 0 at the same time in a superposition. So ultimately, from a theoretical perspective, if you understand quantum theoretics, you can be in multiple places at the same time, processing like infinite amounts of data more quickly. So ideas like cryptography are broken in an instant by a computer that's actually powerful enough to basically look at all circumstances at any one point in time. So it's super exciting.
Is it doing that by actually going into another dimension and spending the time in the other dimension and then just zapping back over here? Because I've heard that these things are even answering questions before they finish asking them.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. I mean, there's 2 schools of thought. There's the people that build the quantum computers. There's companies like D-Wave here in Vancouver and whatever that sell them, that ultimately sell time on the servers and sell them to people like NASA and Google and whatever. And they try and do some simplistic things, and there's big arguments that they're not true quantum computers. And then you go to the IQC, which is the Institute of Quantum Computing over at Waterloo. I've got some friends over there, and they're like, "Oh no, we're 30 years away. All these people are just sort of playing in the courtyard for the time being. We're doing the serious stuff." But the big companies like Google and Facebook and Station Q, which is part of Microsoft, they're going for it big time. They're doubling down on the investments, and they're trying to really change the world. But really, it's such an edge part of computing. We're going to have to. It's not like we're going to have a laptop that's a quantum laptop. That's not really what's going to happen. But we're going to have very large sort of quantum computers that allow us to do like materials science. It allows us to do things like look at the entire history of drugs and chemicals and bodily reactions. Look at the entire human genome and actually work out new ways of eradicating certain diseases in the world, right? It's super exciting stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. So is that like CRISPR stuff, like eradicating the genes before you're born?
Yeah, that's different.
Or is this like personalized medicine? Because that one seems a little more unethical to me.
Well, okay.
Personalized medicine to me seems fine and dandy, but like that, I don't know, that gene manipulation before birth seems weird, spooky.
Okay, so say you have a kid and the kid's born with cerebral palsy, and that's a terrible thing. And obviously you have to look after the kid and you're going to love the kid, but then you want to have more children, right? but you've got a high instance of likelihood that you're going to maybe give another offspring cerebral palsy. So, and you're going to excuse me if you're a listener to this show and I'm getting some of these facts slightly off. Just bear with me. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a quantum physicist. So, yeah, whatever. So, what you can do is at the point of where we're looking at the egg gestating, you could actually potentially go in with CRISPR and go and edit out the genes around cerebral palsy, and that baby gets born in a more natural, healthy state, right? You know, this selective gene editing is going to be the way forward, but it's really going to break some ground in dealing with some pretty heinous sort of congenital diseases that are out there, like heart disease or you know, diseases of the nervous system or anything around immunology, right? So I don't think it's unethical. I think we just need to be very careful to make the choices about what we're going to sort of deal with and whether it's the right thing to do, right?
Case by case, I guess. I suppose doing it for medical reasons over doing it for vanity reasons or things like that is different.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time is Gattaca, right? Yeah. So you go in and you know, they have the baby and it's not perfect, and Ethan Hawke's going to die at the age of 30, and eventually he becomes something great. However, his brother gets genetically edited to be absolutely perfect and strong and an amazing child, and it's loved more than the child that's been born of natural means, right, in the back and conceived in the back of a vehicle. But like, it's one of those situations where we're going to have to be pretty careful about what we do use this sort of technology for. Now, there is some really cool stuff actually happening with pigs growing human organs for transplantation, which is something that we're going to need as well in the future. And I'll explain why in a minute.
I mean, how close are we to a split society where the rich get to do this transhumanism kind of work, and the poor kind of are stuck, you know, in a totally different reality?
Yeah. So, how close are we? Or
is it already happening?
Okay, so we don't have a lot of off-the-shelf, you know, accessible sort of solutions for immortality or whatever. However, let's look at an example. So, Alcor is a company that you can pay to cryogenically freeze you at your point of death, right? Yeah. Now, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. Yep. Obviously, only the rich can have access to that service and potentially be frozen and then brought back to life in 200 years when there's the ability to bring them back in the right way and to cure them of their ills and to create, you know, a better version of them in the future that's sort of healed from all of their woes and you know, whatever injury or whatever reason for death, that's been taken care of. So yeah, absolutely, there's going to be this split divide in a lot of different cases. But what you've got is there's a big democracy around you know, the data behind medicine and also the access to diagnosis, for example. There's an amazing doctor called Dr. Eric Topol that I like to quote often. And the quote is this. It's like, oh, and I thought the only digital in the medical field was my finger during a rectal exam, right? But now digital is actually in everyone's pocket, right? We've got 6 billion phones in the world, right? Half of them are smartphones. By 2020, 2021, there'll be 6 billion smartphones in the world. Now, you've got applications. You've got like over 150,000 applications across the app stores that allow you to do various degrees of diagnosis or reading, like capturing data from exercise and whatever that helps you live a healthier and happier life, right? So, you know, there's some incredible things that are happening in the world. It's when I got really into the futurism thing, it was about 5-6 years ago, and it was just this massive collision. And I've kind of been doing it my whole life, but there was this massive collision of technology that were just hitting the tipping point of change, right?
Yeah, it has changed a lot in the last 4, 5, 6 years. I mean, it is completely different right now. You know, how we're all connected, and so I mean, does following this stuff, like, what kind of view of it? Because it can get pretty overwhelming. I mean, there's a whole, you know, if you come from a fear-based reality, it can feel like you know, all this technology, even though it can be created for good, it can of course be used for. I mean, I don't mean evil, but for nefarious purposes or from Big Brother or whatever. So what kind of outlook do you have? Is it a positive one after following all this, or do we have to be careful that that all this stuff doesn't fall in the wrong hands?
Yeah.
Or not fall in the wrong hands, but you know what I mean. Get abused, I guess.
So I'm a techno-optimist, right? I always have been, but there are points when you read about what's going on in the world, whether it's collusion through cyber hacking, whether it's through like a surveillance culture, whether it's through like social networks experimenting on the people that are actually in their social graphs. But there are points when I sort of have been sort of head in my hands. Oh my God, the world's kind of screwed. What are we doing? What are these companies doing? Yeah. Are we in control? You know, I left Facebook for 2 years because I felt that the surveillance culture was so strong, and that was just after the whole Snowden revelations, right? Mm-hmm. And it was just like, it was so very depressing what was going on. You know, a lot of the companies sort of stepped up and sort of stepped back in the arena and sort of having more ethical and responsible sort of roles in the world. So I kind of have to be optimistic that these people are going to do the right things. And I think, looking at companies like Microsoft and what Bill Gates is doing with the Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation, what Mark Zuckerberg's doing with his foundation, with his wife, and they're trying to sort of push the boundaries of goodness in the world with the money that they're given. I think that this gives us the opportunity to do some amazing things with technology. Now, are there bad people in the world trying to use technology for nefarious purposes? Yeah, I mean, it's called the intelligence services across multiple governments, right? But they're also trying to do really good things and keep us safe and keep us protected as well, right? So there's two sides to every coin. There's two sides to Facebook storing and analyzing the data and then selling that. There's two sides to Google doing the same thing. There's two sides to Amazon sort of walking into every industry and trying to take over. It's about value and it's about personal perception. It's also about making peace with how the world works. And if you use a service and the service is free or very affordable, then you've got to understand that the price that you pay is that you're the product and the data within the system that they're going to sell, right?
Yeah. So how close are we to the whole world being fully connected? I've heard about these satellites providing, Wi-Fi or like to, basically to making sure that it's not just these little areas that are connected, but we're going to be fully connected across the globe. Is that coming pretty soon?
Well, right now we've got over 7 billion people in the world, about 7.5 billion people. Only about 3.75 billion people are actually connected. What the tipping point is this: it's about smartphone technology that's really going to change everything. But you still got remote areas across the world where you're trying to get that connectivity and provide, some level of service so that people can level up, right? So you've got companies like Facebook that have got these large sort of drone planes that are going to fly around and bounce signal, data signals down to remote areas. You've got things like Project Loon, which is done by Google X, which is their sort of moonshots division, and they're actually down in Puerto Rico right now trying to help restore some connections. You've got Branson and Elon Musk and people like that trying to get together to put these micro satellites in orbit that actually create large meshes of communications around the world, so that no one goes without that connection. The other question is, if suddenly we take connection to a remote area, does it actually provide value? Is it actually needed? What are those people going to do? And that's sort of the debate, really. But if you can connect remote areas, you can bring business to those areas, you can bring infrastructure to those areas. As long as it's the right kind of things, I think we're going to be in a good state.
And creativity as well. Like I heard you talking about, how that'll improve their own ability to do their own thing, get in their own business, or create things that'll help their community or the world in general.
Yeah, I mean, today, if you've got access to a smartphone, tablet, or even a laptop, you can basically start your business by building a website yourself, for free, and just putting either ideas out there or things that you want to sell. You've got companies like Etsy that have democratized the crafting market, right? It started all those years back with eBay. And now you've got Amazon and Alibaba and all these people that are just, creating huge value from being able to have that connectivity. I mean, for myself, and there's an interesting story here. I've been on the web since '93. I was a really early adopter. I used to put like websites up to distribute free music that I'd been writing before Creative Commons was there. Then I built my own record company called Raiju Media, and then I was distributing music for free because I realized that it's really hard to convince the world to buy a song, right? And we're kind of in that world now. And that was some sort of 15, 16 years ago. And you know, 2-3 years ago, I built my website, and it generates pretty much 95% of all my business and all my leads. And it's my sounding board, but people are stoked about it, and they can contribute, and they can get hold of me through multiple social media profiles. So suddenly people can find the people that they want to connect with. They can mine the value. And suddenly these networks, very much like us talking on this podcast, that we came through a mutual connection, suddenly we create something amazing like this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of that mutual connection, that was my sister who's in the virtual reality market. I mean, what do you see that? Do you see virtual reality changing the landscape at all? Is that going to truly take off, or is there real big potential there?
Yeah, VR's been around for a long, long time. There's a really great radio show that's from 1992, and it's on SoundCloud. I sort of dug it out a couple of years ago, and it's people talking about virtual reality. It's been around for a long time. Very rudimentary. I got to meet the woman who teaches all the astronauts. They go up to the International Space Station and into space. No, from NASA. And she's amazing, and they've been into virtual reality for like a very, very long time. So it's been there. Now what we've got is we can download it on our phones, so we can buy a very simple plastic or cardboard headset, strap it to our faces, and suddenly go swimming with sharks and be in other situations that we've never been before. So that's becoming democratized. You know, what's good virtual reality, what's bad virtual reality, that's another discussion. Your sister works for one of the preeminent VR gaming companies. My friend Denny Unger is the CEO over there, and you know, they live on Vancouver Island in a place called Qualicum, running around, you know, the fire station there where their office is based, creating the future of gaming and the future of spatial awareness with these amazing VR headsets. And it blows my mind how much you can disappear into that world. And when you take that headset off of your face, how the world that you really truly live in is something that's not necessarily the best thing that you want to have in your life, right? So it's really interesting, and there's been a lot of people that have sort of theorized back in the day about what the impacts of virtual reality are going to be. Jaron Lanier is a big person that's sort of driven the idea of avatars and the virtual worlds. But Terence McKenna, the author, botanist, and psychedelic explorer, really famous guy, did a lot of LSD, DMT, and very famous for talking about all that. There's a quote I'd like to share if it's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Most people think it's far out if we get virtual reality up and running. This is much more profound than that. This is the real thing. We're going to find out what being is. It's a philosophical journey, and the vehicles are not simply cultural, but biology itself. We're closing distance with the most profound event that planetary ecology can encounter, which is the freeing of life from the chrysalis of matter. It's never happened before. I mean, the dinosaurs didn't do this, nor the prokaryotes emerging. No, this takes a billion years of forward-moving evolution to get to a place where information can detach itself from the material matrix, then look back on a cast-off mode of being as it rises into a higher dimension. So if you think about that, and imagine if the three of us were people that were quadriplegics, and we could barely move our heads even, or any parts of our face, and someone straps us into this virtual world and takes us on a ride, you've completely transcended out of the physical being, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's going to change the future a little bit as well. I think it's going to get more entrenched, and there'll be more education and travel, and I mean, you'll be able to see the world through the cyberspace. I think it'll happen fairly soon.
Well, I was fucking listening to something today where they were talking about how guys that can't see colors get like an eye put in. That the buddy had a fake eye already, and they were able to replace it with an eye that could see color, but it can record too. and do a couple other things. But the only problem is right now it gets a little hot, so we can only have it in for a couple minutes at a time.
Yeah, there's also a guy called Neil Harbison. He's got this. He's actually he's got something plugged into the back of his head that actually resonates different tones. So he can't see color, but he can hear color.
Wow.
So it's like this synesthetic
synesthesia.
Sort of view. It's like a synesthetic view of the world. Like he can look at what you're wearing and realize that you're wearing a yellow sweater because he knows the tones intimately across hundreds of different tones about what the world looks like. And when you meet him, you've got your own sort of signature sound or sound palette, right, of how you look and what you sound like, right?
Is that just because the sound, is the sound system of the human body easier to tap into than the nervous system for optics, I guess?
Well, if you think about it, the visual auditory systems are pretty closely connected to one another. But then you've got situations when people are deaf or people are blind, the compensation kicks in, right? And your brain's got enough elasticity to be able to learn new modes of recognition, spatial awareness, and memory, right?
Yeah, I wonder when we're going to be able to sense our own energy pattern or even thoughts. Like, are we pretty close to being able to read thoughts? I mean, I hear other guys talking about that it's only 10, 20 years away from, knowing what we're all thinking.
Yeah, jacking into the matrix almost, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain experiments that have happened. So I think it was Washington University ran an experiment. This is about 3 years ago, where there were two guys. They were 1,000 miles apart, and they connected up one guy with EEGs and sensors to his brain, and he was controlling a mouse on a screen and clicks and whatever. And what was happening was they were transferring, over the internet, the thought patterns to this other guy's brain that was then replicating what the guy was doing at a distance, right?
Wow, that's interesting.
It's almost like mind reading. I mean, it's not, this isn't like the Mysterons and suddenly I can read your mind and from a distance, or I can I no longer need to speak. I can just do this through thoughts and kinetic energy. I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen. But there's been lots of people about downloading consciousness, being able to travel into other people's minds to be able to do certain things. Even virtual reality with this kind of technology could help you become an able-bodied person when you're not an able-bodied person, albeit for a short amount of time, right?
Yeah.
I think there's interesting things to look at when we match up all the technologies as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Darren, did you have a question?
No, if you got something, go ahead.
No, well, what about these maker spaces? We haven't really talked about that a lot on the show, but we did meet some guys a couple of years ago, and they were involved in that. And actually, it was in the UK. Is the UK a place where that's thriving more than other places? And what's going on in some of these maker spaces?
Yeah, maker spaces are incredible, and they've been around for a long, long time. They've just really been called maker spaces most recently because there's been this growth of people that wanted to start their own businesses and create their own, objects and whatever. And there's a massive one. There's Maker Labs down here in Vancouver, where I am right now.
Oh, yeah.
And most large cities and towns have maker spaces today. The growth has been incredible. They have maker fairs that on a yearly basis, they have thousands of people coming to see, the crazy vehicles or the 3D printing or the electronics or the incredibly dangerous chemical experiments they've been doing, right? And there are these networks of people. So, for example, in Victoria and here and across Canada, there's the Open Science Network, where you've got these maker spaces working with people that are sort of doing low-level sort of, investigation into bacteria and playing with DNA and whatever, albeit in a very rudimentary way. But the maker scene is going to be one of the big things that drives a modern economy where people can do what they want to do. Whether you're a carpenter, a 3D printer, whether you're an artist, it's just going to keep exploding. It's no longer just artist studios. It's people building and making things that are going to change the world as well. And this is how large business sort of happens. I think it's interesting to think, the company Hewlett-Packard started in their garage, and I think they've still got the same garage as well, actually sort of preserved down there in California. But a lot of things started back in the day in garages and in workshops and in sheds, right? And that it's just that what we're doing is we're putting the garages, workshops, and sheds into larger spaces where everyone can feed off of each other, and that's causing exponential growth in that space.
So it's almost like a DIY R&D kind of thing, where I guess you're not really going to produce stuff in there, but you're going to play around with stuff and invent stuff.
You can produce stuff too. I think that's because I've read a lot of things about sort of the merger of work and hobby and play sort, and it's like in the next 20 years those lines are going to really blur between your day job and your hobby.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, what's really going to happen here as well? I mean, no one's going to have just a single job in the future. People today, they have jobs and then they have hobbies, and then suddenly you can monetize your hobbies. So it becomes that sort of, you become a pro-amateur at what you do. And then suddenly you quit your day job and you go, your hobby suddenly your career, right? This is absolutely what's going to happen. Back in the day, we used to call it like crazy inventors in their sheds, building things that people didn't understand. James Dyson built a wheelbarrow with a massive ball on the front because he realized it was easier to get across rough dirt, but everyone thought it was a ridiculous idea. Now look how big Dyson is, right?
Yeah.
It's like the guy who created the clockwork radio. Everyone thought he was crazy for like 15 years until it was a guy called Trevor Bayliss out of the UK, until he suddenly realized that he could build one for a reasonably cheap price and then distribute them all across places like Africa when they didn't have the opportunity to charge their radios, and he suddenly changed the entire world, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. We should probably look into one around here, Darren. You've kind of expressed
we should build one in my garage. Studios in the garage. We started Grimerica in the garage.
Makerspace.
We'll start a makerspace out there. We could interview the guys while they're making stuff.
Ah, there you go.
We'll put a big ribbon around it, and we'll bring Nick out to smash some champagne on the door and christen it for us.
Hey, yeah, and do you know what? There's already some really great guys working at somewhere called Protospace out there in Calgary. Oh. You go and check it out for sure. You should get them on the show. That would be fascinating to chat to.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, Protospace. Yeah, I think I've heard of them actually. Huh. So what about? So there's a lot of 3D printing going on in there, I guess, as well. I mean, we went to see a 3D printer before, and I wasn't sure if that was gonna, just sort of be a fad or take off to really, really show the difference between, these manufacturing platforms. And I guess, do you think that's still going to be the future of things as far as manufacturing goes?
Yeah, 3D printing has changed things so drastically. Back in the day, it's like, okay, I've got an idea. Let's build a model. Well, how do you build a model back in the day? Out of wood, and you carve it and you build it together. You glue together some sticks of wood and matches, and you take aircraft model kits and bring them all in. And then, after 4 weeks, you built something. And then, okay, now I'm going to make a mold. Now I need to send that off to somewhere that can build like a plastic mold, and then it gets sent back and it's wrong, and then you have to redesign it, and then you get sent back. And months go by.
Yeah.
Now you can download free CAD software, design you can take the dimensions of anything that you want to model around or model with, whether it's the interior of a Tesla car or something like the iPhone 10. And you can take the dimensions, you can build whatever you want around that, and you can build it in an afternoon, and you can print it off in front of you in about an hour. Realize what works, what doesn't. If it doesn't, you go back and change it, and then you change things up and print it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's good. And then if it's going to become a product, then you can just ship it off as a digital file to whoever, and there you've got a business, and you've spent maybe 3 days, right? And it's insane what's being printed today, right?
Huh.
So cars are being printed, right? So, Ford has got a big 3D printing and also a virtual reality development center as well. And they go into new ways of production. I was just reading a short while ago, I think it was just literally 2 months ago, that there's actually a 3D printed submarine out there now.
Wow.
So it's cheaper and faster to prototype these things. If you think about it, you've actually got a 3D printer up there in the International Space Station. If there's certain things that break on the space station now, they can print a new piece and just deploy that. These are difficult places to be able to sort things out. So places like submarines or, the International Space Station, or remote areas. MIT researchers have created a 3D printing, drug printing machine that's about the size of 2 refrigerators.
Ooh, what kind of drugs can we print?
Any drugs, as long as you've got the constituent base elements, right?
So can I just like throw my shake in there and print out some primo bud?
I'm not quite sure.
Well, you just sift right through it and pull out all the THC for you and just get some high content. Jesus.
Yeah, you don't need a 3D printer for that. There's other ways that you can do that.
Exactly. So speaking of that, what about microdosing? And we were talking about that the other day, and people in Silicon Valley, and I mean, all these people are starting to play around with it. So what's the future of that? It seems like, we've seen all these results from psychedelics, or I think it was psilocybin, how it really quiets your mind in a way, instead of those brain scans everybody thought they were going to show, like, it being all lit up, and it actually was the reverse, which kind of makes sense that people have played around with it. They kind of get that. So is that really opening space for people to be creative and organized? And talk a little bit about the whole microdosing thing.
Yeah, so
and smart drugs, I guess, as well.
Yeah, so psychedelics. I've been chatting about psychedelics for quite some time, and really, it started fascinating me when I read a book called "What the Dormouse Saw" by a New York Times author. His name slips my mind. John Markoff, sorry. And Markov actually, he found that a lot of the developments in the world in the technological area actually came from people that were like a little strung out after the late 60s, right? So, there were massive developments at the end of the 60s, like 1968. There's a guy called Douglas Engelbart in Stanford, sat down, and he had the mouse that he just invented. He had a trackpad. He did things like the technology that we're using to have a chat on this phone call. He did video conferencing and teleconferencing for the first time. It's pretty wild stuff. But what was fascinating about this was the best computer scientists in America were on the East Coast. But what was the difference? If the West Coast didn't have the best, what did they have? They had people that were different thinkers. The different thinkers had actually experimented with a lot of psychedelics as part of the counterculture movement, right? So what they actually found was, and subsequent researchers sort of looked into this, is how LSD actually changes the way that the brain builds connections to think about solution spaces and problems in new ways. There's a great researcher called Dr. James Fadiman that sort of looks into this as well, and did a lot of experiments with microdosing mescaline and psilocybin and whatever. But it's interesting. I mean, Steve Jobs said that, he did acid, and it was one or two of the most important things he ever did in the world. If you go back even further to the sort of mid-1950s, Sir Francis Crick was one of the Nobel laureates that discovered DNA and the DNA helix. So reportedly, he was on acid, completely in a completely different zone and a way of thinking, and he described the DNA helix structure that he saw through a psychedelic trip, which was obviously connected to all the work that he'd done before, to his wife that drew it down. And there's actually images of the drawing that she made that helped drive the innovations of thinking around DNA. So psychedelics, I mean, that was large dose psychedelics. Smaller dose psychedelics today are being sort of applied, in computer science, in architecture and engineering, obviously in more creative arts like, painting and music, right? But it is something that, albeit illegal, and, it's difficult to find, LSD, psilocybin, whatever, unless you've got the sort of the underground connections, as it were. It's something that as a discipline is actually rising, because people are starting to realize that, taking a microdose every 3 days or so just gives you that amount of buzz. It's not a psychedelic buzz. That amount of drive, that focus, that difference of thought that takes you in new directions, and suddenly everything's changing. I know dozens of people here in Vancouver that have done this and still do this, and it's everyone from like accountants in large consultancies through to video producers and script writers, right? It's very diverse.
And they notice a difference of their cognitive functions, and does it provide clarity or organization? I mean, Darren, you've always said after
this is interesting for me because I've been really contemplating microdosing for a while now.
So narratively, like, people have told me this. So one example, I've got a friend that does video editing. They write them and their partner. They write scripts. They do video editing. You know, it's really tough work. It's long work. You have to be creative. You have to think differently about how you go from one scene to the next and something that's fresh and new and is going to be engaging. You know, they were saying that, like, for a 2-week period, they were microdosing every day, and they were working 12 to 16 hours a day, nonstop, without being tired. And just working in new ways, producing more work, doing new things that they'd never even thought of before. You know, they weren't high. They were just, their brain was just connecting in completely different ways because the dose was super low. But then what they were finding is, you know, after 4 or 5 days, you know, they'd literally have to switch off and step away, and they were completely sort of spent. Because you're still using energy, you're still using the connections in the brain, you know. So there's some dangers there as well, right?
Yeah, I've heard a couple different. I've heard like 5 days on, 2 days off with 1/10 of a gram, or like I've heard another one was like 1/4 gram every 4 days or something like that. I've heard a couple different methods.
Do you know what? There's lots of forums online, especially on Reddit, that talk about this, and people. This is what I do, and this is what I do, and that's what I try and work out. And then you've got the whole spiritual, psychedelic, you know, the ayahuasca or the ibogaine sort of experiences that people try and have, which is less about productivity and it's more about spiritual and personal awareness, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know, it's been proven that using psilocybin, like from magic mushrooms, has helped people that are actually terminally ill come to terms with death alongside therapy. MDMA has been used for the same thing as well, right? Yeah. So there is going to be a really interesting sort of next 3 to 5 years where things like MDMA, which the FDA has already sort of heralded as a potential breakthrough drug for therapy of PTSD and deep sort of like mental trauma that people have, you know, all the way through to like LSD, where the research has been kicked up by associations like MAPS, and whatever. Suddenly, it's going to become vibrant and interesting. And unfortunately, the stiffs, the man, as it were, sort of shut it all down because who wanted freedom of thought back in the 1960s, right? It's potentially dangerous to the modern society. Yeah,
I mean, all the tests they did before the drug war. I mean, they were really close to using LSD and these things in therapeutic ways until they put the clamp down back in the 60s. Yeah. So hopefully we can get back to the, you know, at least to that part. I mean, Darren and I have had these discussions where I feel like psilocybin is pretty close to becoming legal at some point. You know, like just like they have these little pot shops now. That'll be soon enough where you can have.
I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime.
You don't think so? Eh?
I mean, but if you would have told me weed was going to be legal in our lifetime, I probably wouldn't have believed you about that 10 years ago.
Yeah, I remember traveling to Amsterdam. Me and my friends used to go over there, like go and have some fun. It's cleaned up a lot now. It's very different today. But 20 years ago, Amsterdam, you could walk into a store and buy mushrooms. I mean, hell, I grew up in the southwest of England in farming country. Magic mushrooms grew on my school field, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like everywhere. So it's it's interesting times when people try and stop something that's potentially very powerful from being readily available and being used. It's all about guidance and it's all about teachings, right? It's why, you know, when you have ayahuasca ceremonies, you have shaman, right? It's why when you use MDMA in a therapeutic setting, you have, you know, people that are counselors that are trained to actually work with that substance to get the most benefit out of the session and go into the areas that are really difficult from a trauma perspective and go through some of the tough, deep areas that are going to result in some really good healing, right?
Yeah. I feel like the natural stuff like the psilocybin is more, I don't know, to me it resonates a little bit more because, you know, this technological advancement in a lot of different ways, it's, you know, it proves years later to be damaging in a way, like, you know, like the food industry. I mean, yeah, we started creating all this, food that's just end up being full of chemicals. And I mean, so many of these big businesses push all this technological thing into our throat and get us to consume it. And then we find out later on that, whether it's like fluoride in the water or chemicals in the food or glyphosate and all these problems that are coming up later. So, is the same thing, is there the same risk with, nootropics and all these supplements and smart drugs? Like, where are the smart drugs going to go? I mean, we must be getting pretty close now to, I've heard about, what's that one smart drug we talk about, Darren? That
Viagra?
No,
What's funny is today I was actually, I was in the shaft at work with doing some layout for the guys that abate the asbestos.
Yeah.
And we said something, I was like, I wonder what my kids' are going to be abating.
Yeah, later on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've been playing around with nootropics and smart drugs for a few years now, and if you look in my supplements, it's like crazy. Someone was saying to me, it's like, oh, do you from a smart drug regime, what do you do? It's I don't really do much. And then I open my cupboard, and there's like 50 separate things in here. Yeah. Everything, obviously there's the Advil, right? But then you've got things like milk thistle and green tea extract. You've got 5-HTP. You've got vitamin D. You've got magnesium. You've got maca. You've got like yerba mate that you drink because it's crazy strong. Siberian ginseng. And then you've got like, more off the shelf nootropics like, alpha brain, L-theanine, and whatever that allow you to have more mental sort of focus and sort of attention to detail, or stamina really in certain ways. And it's becoming a huge industry if you actually look at that. I mean, I was pulling some numbers on this earlier. Like if you just look at nutritional supplements alone, it's like a $60 billion industry, right? Yeah. And the global nootropics market is about 1.34 billion at the moment, and that's going to go to 6+ billion by 2024. People, we've been told in the world, it's like wake up, have a cup of coffee, smoke a cigarette. Do you know what? Like your kids, they're going to wake up and they're going to take two or three tablets that's going to be to their profile of how they want to feel for the day. They're not going to drink coffee. They're not going to drink cigarettes, which is a great thing, and they're just going to think and operate in different ways. And the nootropics market is going to be something that's really hot. Again, you can burn out if you do too much of this stuff, right? But I'm going to be going down in January to speak to a lot of people that have founded a lot of these companies as part of a project I'm doing. And, the questions I'd have is like, if you do these fasting regimes or these exercise regimes, meditation obviously is really powerful, but like you then suddenly have these regimes around nootropics that you sort of push out there. What does this actually do? Are we just going to be like 40 years old and completely burnt out and tired and just completely over that? Are we going to be superhumans that are suddenly, a dozen IQ points higher than we were last week just because of a regime of tablets that we're taking? So these are some of the questions I'm going to look at, right? Or is Deborah stuck in her one bedroom apartment in San Francisco completely with her mind blown because microdosing and nootropics, whilst it earned her high accolades, say being a coder in Silicon Valley, after 5 years she's kind of in a mildly sort of detached and vegetative state because
with a bunch of cats.
Maybe a bunch of cats, could be a bunch of anything in San Francisco, right?
See, I go back and forth between that and my kids will be hunting fucking deer in the
back to the wild
of the city.
Yeah, it's like, are we suddenly going to get back? Are we, there's a whole movement around rewilding, taking places that have been sort of made urban and then taking them back into, the forests, maybe Calgary in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be a beauteous wonderland of renewable energy and green spaces and all all sorts of lovely things.
Well, there's the two parts to the biohacking. There's the whole technological aspect where I think that the science, in a lot of ways, I feel like the science is way ahead of the medical community. Like, I feel like the medical community is so big and slow that there's all these people. It's almost like like a biohacking maker lab scene where they're doing all their own science and their own experiments, and they're testing all this stuff out, and there's really good results. Yet it's going to take decades before it gets into the mainstream medical community. And then there's the other side of the biohacking where there's simple little tools like you mentioned, where fasting, I mean, there's huge benefits to fasting, and even just little things like dry skin brushing or whatever else you can do that are just almost going back to, like, away from the technology and back to a more natural state.
Right. Yeah. It is really, really interesting. I like to think that there's a huge democracy that's going to come to certainly the big pharma medical community as well, right?
Yeah. That really needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said earlier in this conversation, we've got these smartphones in our pockets that replace the general practitioner doctors that we go and see. Done. It's over. The medical community is starting to see that. You've got people that are working in maker spaces looking at new ways of synthesizing insulin. So insulin is something like a $45 billion industry worldwide, right?
Wow.
Every year. Yeah. And insulin's really, really expensive. And there are big pharma companies that produce the insulin. And there's these two guys in a maker lab down in the States that are starting to produce open source insulin.
Wow.
Right? So what does that do? It just kills the bottom of the market, right? And everything becomes cheaper and more available. The patents and the IP and big pharma is probably going to be one of the most disrupted areas in the next few years. Wait until the big companies like, Google and Facebook and Amazon and whatever start turning their billions of dollars towards, pharmaceutical research, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you mentioned those big companies as well. Now these are the big companies and biggest companies in the world. Before it was oil and banking and all, and now it's big data, and all these companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook. So, but you also mentioned education as becoming the big one. I mean, I feel like that's really changing as well. Like so much is changing right now, but education, especially, people are coming out of the university and they're creating stuff. Professors are creating their YouTubes online, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. And there's all these big, you can learn, like, even just with podcasts. I mean, if I anything I want to know about, I can just listen to somebody talk about it for free right now.
That's right. And I left
you should donate.
I left school with no real qualifications. And why was that? It's not because I was stupid. I was completely distracted, and I had no faith in the teachers of the curriculum. I thought that, being taught English and math in the way I was being taught those subjects wasn't going to actually add value to the life that I was going to create. At this point, I was like 15 years old. I was a skateboarder, already plugged into the internet and gaming and doing all sorts of stuff, right? I was really like pushing some boundaries. And starting to realize that, that's not the way that the world works. And it took me a few years to sort of find the right sort of university to go to and whatever. But yeah, I mean, the ways that people are going to start thinking, education's going to have to change. They say that 65% of all jobs that kids are going to do today, kids that are at school today, but the 65% of the jobs that they'll do in the future don't exist. Right? Kids that do more vocational training and more sort of open-minded ways of learning are going to actually start their integration into the modern world of work, even starting their own companies earlier than anyone else, other kids, right? And they're actually going to get a lot of benefit from these new ways of thinking. Elon Musk has actually created a school down in Silicon Valley called Ad Astra for his kids and other people's kids that doesn't have grades. Everyone learns together, multiple different subjects, right? I was chatting to a great friend of mine, and his kid, he took him out of the normal school system and put him into this super progressive, technologically sort of focused school out in Surrey. And he's saying that his kid is actually enjoying education rather than coming home and doing a homework that's just, you know what, write this, work that out, and write that there. computers are going to do that in the future. We need people to be creative, and we need people to, understand like roles of ethics and philosophy, and how to connect with other humans in deeper ways. How to build environments in virtual reality, how to think about artificial intelligence, and how to think about the new ways of the world, rather than just like, hey, here's long division, like go figure.
Yeah, and then flip burgers. Yeah.
You don't. You can't sell.
There's not going to be any of those. Yeah, there won't be any of those jobs. Like all the algorithmic jobs that are simple tasks. The first jobs that are going to go are algorithmic jobs that are like data driven, right? Like administration tasks or cashiers at the bank or cashiers in retail. The people flipping burgers, they're just going to be replaced by robots. So those sort of the kids that messed around in school, running around the playground, oh yeah, they're the popular kids, and then you see them 10 years later, and they're on a construction site just digging holes and not doing anything of skill. They're not going to have that choice. Everyone's going to have to level up, and it's going to be a challenge because not everyone's at the same level of mental aptitude or have got that privileged background to be able to focus on studying whatever. So we're going to have to work out in society how we can provide equal opportunities for everyone, right?
And is this going to end up, I mean, look what's happening with our political system right now too, not to get too deep into politics, but is this global connection and the smartphones and all this stuff you're talking about going to help us finally in the political environment? And is democracy going to get, we're going to have a chance democratizing the politics, like which should be happening already? I mean, really, it's just...
Or they'll be completely hijacked.
Yeah, I mean, when will we be seeing a different change in that, you think?
Do you know what true democracy looks like? It looks like Trump getting elected and Brexit happening. That's what true democracy looks like, right? And I say that, and it's quite a controversial thing around that I say that is when you give enough people in the world that don't have an understanding of politics, geopolitics, policy, ethics, how a society should work in a good libertarian way or in a good conservative way or whatever, people just don't care, and they just get influenced by the wrong people, and they undergo like the process of democracy motivated like never before, and they make really stupid decisions. I mean, the UK coming out of Europe is one of the dumbest things I've heard of in my entire lifetime. I mean, sure, Trump being elected was such a wrong decision, but now America's like really paying for it big time. And now they've got a maniac in charge, right? There's an amazing video that Robert Reich, who used to be an advisor to Reagan and Clinton administrations on economics, he did last week. It was the 1 year anniversary of Trump being elected. And he goes, this video is celebrating 1 year without a president of the US of A.
Yeah, but you got to think that there's, things aren't good for these people to begin with. There's a lot of corruption going on. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Like getting away. When does the system going to break so that it can be rebuilt for the people? I mean, it's there's a lot of global corruption that you can't ignore as well.
Yeah, I mean, do we follow the model that Cuba followed when Castro took over?
How about Iceland?
Right, let's talk about Iceland, right? Okay, so Iceland's kind of had a lot of scandal in the last few years, but in 2008, when all the bankers got sent to jail and everything was going wrong, the city of Reykjavik realized that they needed a change. So they voted in a guy called John Gunnar, and John Gunnar is a very famous stand-up comedian in Iceland, because the city needed humor and a different perspective on running their city at that point in time. Actually worked out pretty good. And then it's like, let's progress further. And Iceland's good to look at. Let's crowdsource the constitution. You guys heard of this, yeah?
Okay.
So let's crowdsource the constitution. And it was in every newspaper. I used to talk about it in talks. It's like, look at this, is democracy, open source politics, amazing. 3 years later, it completely failed, because the people that were trying to contribute to an open source contribution just suggested things that were completely illegal, wouldn't work, dynamically were actually really fundamentally stupid. And they had to go back to the original process of having the smart people that were empathetic, that could connect with communities and still have the trickle up effect of getting opinion and synthesizing that into something that works. They still needed that process, right? So, do we burn it all down and remove all the political systems or whatever? Well, countries like Cuba did that, right? And now Cuba, you've got people on an average of $20 a month, sort of income in a communist society, supposedly living happy lives with a crumbling infrastructure and sort of always living on the edge of absolute collapse as a country again, right? It's really tough. And I love Cuba, and I love going to companies like Laos, which is also, sort of a communist country or whatever. I think some of these can work. But, it's a tough road if you truly go down the, break the model and let's rebuild the world, right?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah. I don't think you can, I can't go full anarchy. I think you need limited government at some level. A lot less of it.
Probably more control at the local level would be good. I feel like it's the national level that fucks everything up.
That's right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And localization and small communities can have this alternative way of living, right? So there's a place in Copenhagen called Christiania, which is an anarchist sort of off the grid. It's an anarchist community that sort of overtook some barracks in the late 60s.
What's it called? Christiania?
Christiania.
Okay.
And I went there. Wow, I went there nearly 20 years, and it was wilder than Amsterdam. It's called Freetown Christiania, and they've got a set of rules of how they operate, right? But what they had was, as soon as they built an anarchist community, everyone moved in, including biker gangs and organized crime and drugs and whatever, and suddenly undermined that free society, because some people see freedom as just completely going off, the edge of the cliff, right?
Yeah.
And some people see freedom as a huge opportunity to sort of level up the world, right? So what we have to do is we have to usher in freedom in the right kind of way.
Huh. So did that not work out in the end then, that place?
Yeah. They kicked all the drug dealers out. They kicked all the bikers out. They stopped a lot of the parties that they had there, and they just normalized it back down, right? And
now it's still going?
Yeah, it's still going. It's not as crazy as it was when I went there, but it's definitely still going. And they're looking at development, and it's kind of funny. These barracks that they took over were a short hop from the royal residencies, right? And it was a real thorn in the side of Denmark for a long time. But libertarian society and true anarchism can really ride out in a positive way, but you have to come back in and sort of really bring a level of government to your own principles back in to really make it work,
You need something, because right now, currently in the world, there are $2 billion boats named Boaty McBoatface and Ferry McFerryface.
Yeah, again, true democracy, right? Thanks to the Brits that do that, right? But so here's Christiana's common law. So let's look at this. Right, no weapons, no hard drugs, no violence, no bulletproof clothing, right? No bikers, no biker jackets, right? No affiliation to gangs, no private cars, no sale of fireworks. That's a bit weird. No use of dynamite, and no stolen goods, right? So it's like an anarchist commune that's just trying not to have all the really seedy, shady parts of life in it, right?
Huh.
That sounds pretty.
It's awesome.
They've taken all the fun out of it.
Yeah, no.
Do you know what
constitutes a hard drug?
Yeah, that's
in Europe, right? This is heroin, right? Heroin and crack and meth. Yeah,
those are probably no good.
Yeah. So before we run out of time here, just what else do you think do you want to say about your work and what you do and where you're going to be speaking and stuff like that?
Yeah. So it's becoming really interesting for me. I'm going to be speaking in Toronto a couple of times over the next couple of weeks, and here and there around sort of BC and in Alberta as well. So a number of different people, everything from the Ontario government to the large consultancy PricewaterhouseCoopers. Next year, it's going to be bigger and better. I've just been invited to go to Dubai. I've just been invited to go down to Peru. what's really interesting, the trajectory that I've seen with me, doing grassroots community events and meetups and small conferences, the momentum behind people just want to understand what's going to happen in the future. They kind of want to understand, what's coming tomorrow, what's coming in 5 years, and what's coming in 20 years.
Exactly.
And there's me and a number of the people that I know out there doing this that really do work very hard to try and understand the landscape and some of the signals that are happening today that's going to usher in the new world. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been talking about Bitcoin and blockchain. I would have been talking about quantum computing. It just wasn't even on the radar in the same way as today, where it's like disrupting monetary systems and it's going to change the world of cryptography. It's just wild. And that exponential change is happening because everything's mashing together. And what I'm saying, I'm just writing my annual report for next year and the predictions, and maybe I'll come back and talk to you about that as well in 2 or 3 months.
Sure.
I'm saying that we're headed towards a world where the idea of moonshots, right, these big ideas, curing cancer and curing global warming and whatever, it's kind of bullshit. Because if we look at that scale, there's only a few companies in the planet that have got the billions of dollars to develop solutions for it that can ultimately own the cure for cancer, right? People like Microsoft and Google, well, they want to own the cure, right? They want to have that recognition, and they ultimately want that revenue flow. I personally think, right? What we're headed towards is exactly what we've been talking about in this entire conversation: is radical creativity. The small changes that we can make as individuals, whether it's in maker spaces, R&D labs, whether it's in smaller companies, that are just coming up with new solutions. The radical creativity is going to create a momentum when all of the radically ambitious projects that we're going to do come together as one and create a tidal wave of innovation, right?
Yeah.
And then we can solve the big problems that some of the big guys are sort of feeding on. Right now, they're just acquiring all the radically creative companies to feed into the big solutions. I think what we have to do is stay radically creative, independent thinkers, and not take the big money and realize that, somewhere down the line that there's something more than money in the world to really be recognized as something that's going to provide value to the whole of humanity.
I wonder if could these quantum computers make Bitcoin obsolete?
Yeah, basically, if you were to build a quantum computer that had enough qubits to break cryptography, the entire Bitcoin economy collapses immediately.
That's what I was thinking. So that's basically, that isn't that on the horizon?
It's quite a way away.
Okay.
It's quite a way away.
So buy Bitcoin, but be ready to sell them.
I wouldn't recommend that anyone buys Bitcoin right now, because everyone's buying Bitcoin because they think it's going to keep making a lot of money, and it's the wrong way to get into any kind of market, right? Yeah. But hey, I'm wrong. I'm wrong in a lot of aspects, right? I've got a lot of friends that are Bitcoin millionaires because they were Bitcoin farming 6 years ago, and we were like, what the hell are you doing? None of this makes sense.
Well, they should get out now.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, I can buy a pizza with 10 Bitcoin. It's like, wow. And now that pizza is like a $70,000 pizza, right?
I remember fucking someone gave us a bunch of Bitcoins a couple months ago, and they were like, you got to convert them right away. And it was like, it's doubled.
I think we lost them too. Are those ones we lost, and then we couldn't get them back?
Man, I don't even want to think about fucking what that little transaction is worth now, because somebody sent us $100 worth of Bitcoin when it was at like $200.
Man,
and they sent it, but I had given them the wrong address.
Do you know what? I've heard several. So I've got a friend who had a hard drive with his crypto wallet on it. Right? He's lost it. And there was a guy in the UK, and this was heartbreaking. It was 2 years ago. He'd sent his computer to the into e-recycling, and his Bitcoin wallet was on the computer. And he realized after a week that he'd done this, and literally he spent months trying to find his hard drive in these huge e-waste piles. I don't think he managed to find it. But it's like, it's like burning $1 million.
It's best not to think about that shit.
I like thinking about it because I don't have any Bitcoin and it makes me chuckle.
That's right. I don't have any either. I mean, like the past. It's best not to dwell on the past. You can't do fucking anything about it anyway. Yeah. Unless you're gonna get busy making a time machine.
That's right.
Hey, well, we should wrap it up. Where can our listeners track you down? Is there any place our listeners can track you down if they want to bug you or follow you? Or?
Yeah. So NikolasBadminton.com. You can just type my name in the internet, and there's tons of videos and articles I've written for like Fast Company. I've got an article coming out in Vice Motherboard around AI and the financial markets in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, I'm going to be on CTV next Wednesday talking about technological immortality as well.
Yeah, you've been all over the place. How did you do that so quick in like 5 or 6 years? You got yourself out there quite a bit, eh?
There's a lot of people that are too scared to really have the opinions that I have. I'm pretty provocative, but I'm kind of informed by the people around me. And hey, I'm not always right. I put my hand up to say that I'm wrong on occasion. But do you know what? When I'm right about certain things, people sort of sit up and pay attention. And for years, I've advised very large companies at the board level around business strategy. And now I advise very large companies at the board level around foresight and futurology and about how they can future-proof their organizations. It's incredibly valuable for them. I'm having a blast. It's really fun.
Well, then, and you know what? People trust you because you admit when you're wrong and you admit your mistakes, and then people will trust that. I think that's that's valuable. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, for sure. And some people never ask me back, so hey, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll ask you back.
Yeah, well,
we'll send you a shirt to wear on TV.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man. Send it over. I'm in. And a toque.
Okay.
How do we not have fucking toques?
Yeah, we should get toques. Yeah. All right, Nikolas. Thanks a lot for coming on, and we'll link to all this stuff in the show notes. And you have a good night and enjoy your travels there coming up.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.